So, welcome everybody on stream. Hello everybody here at the venue. It's absolutely great and fantastic to be back in person. So, once upon a time, and more specific, 23 years ago, when I started as a software engineer, there was a legend out there. A software engineer to whom we all looked up. And nowadays, he's best known for creating Trello and Stack Overflow. So, maybe you can already guess who it is. So it's Joel Spolsky. And Joel was back then best known for his blog. And his most famous blog post was Things You Should Never Do, Part 1. And actually, I never figured out whether there's a Part 2, so maybe somebody you know. And in that blog post, he named the single worst strategic mistake a software company, organization, team, or developer can do. And that is rewriting software from scratch. And that is what we did. For the TOX test automation tool, a tool downloaded more than 80 million times a month, both heavily used in the open source community and by multi-billion-dollar companies alike. And today, I want to tell you the story of TOX, and especially about the rewrite. You will learn about the reasons for the rewrite, the planning, the ups and downs, and how we finally released it, and most importantly, you will learn more about us, the maintainers. So first about me. My name is Jürgen Gmach. I'm a senior software engineer at Canonical. I work at the Launchpad team, so I take care of the build infrastructure for Ubuntu. And when I introduced myself here at the conference, somebody was asking, hey Jürgen, from now on, when I apt install something, or a package, I virtually see you every time pressing a button to approve the download. But luckily, it's all automated. So you can always reach out to me on Twitter or on Mastodon, and I also have a blog, but it's not as famous as the one of Joel. I'm one of the maintainers of TOX. I'm a PSF fellow, and I live in the Bavarian forest, or the outer reach of the Bavarian forest. And that's possible because of the new remote work. And actually, for Canonical, that's not new. We are remote first for 19 years, and actually we are hiring. We are also hiring, especially in my team. We are looking for 2 new junior positions. So if you want to, if you're interested, reach out or have a look at the website. Now back to TOX. What is TOX? So TOX is a test automation tool. And what is that? So in order to explain that, we need to have a look what usually is done when you want to test a library. And that is the manual way. You create a virtual environment, you build the package, you install the package, you install the test dependencies, maybe PyTest and coverage, and then you run the tests. And probably more like linters, and you want to build documentation. But then that's only for one environment, for your local PC, and not, you can't test against other Python versions or against a different framework version. And what about your colleagues? They need to duplicate all the effort. And also for CI. So for CI, you need to duplicate it again. And maybe you have external contributors. So that's pretty tedious, right? So there's a better way. And with TOX, you can create a configuration file, and then you can specify the Python versions, and you set up the test environment, and then you just install TOX, preferable with pipx, which is an awesome tool to install Python command line tools, and then you just run it on your PC, on CI, on your colleagues' PCs, and all the contributors. To understand the rewrite, we first need to understand the roots of TOX. So TOX was created by Holger Krekel back in 2010, so it's already 13 years old. And maybe you're not familiar with that name. But Holger also created PyTest, he created DevPy, and PyPy. Not PyPy, the package index, but PyPy, the alternative Python implementation. And then some time passed, 7 years. TOX got pretty popular, some even called it the standard in testing. And then Bernard Gabor joined, not because he wanted to become an open source maintainer, but out of necessity. He wanted to have some bug fixes, and he wanted some new features, and so he became a maintainer. But soon he noticed that TOX was written with some specific assumptions. So it's only used to create a Python environment, not a Conda environment, only on your local system. you can only configure it via tox.ini and not PyProject.toml or a Python file. And it's only there to create source distributions and not a wheel. And while you saw the configuration first, it's pretty small. It can be really long, and Tox evaluated it completely eagerly at startup, and so startup was pretty slow. And he noticed that all the changes, when he wanted to change anything of that, it was really hard or even impossible. And obviously, when you join a project, what do? You rewrite it, obviously. So, but as you can see, Bernard started his first rewrite attempt, but he did not finish it. But he learned valuable lessons of that. And then, just a little bit time after that, Holger Kriekel left the project. And this is something completely normal, something healthy for a project when there's some rotation. And when you're not entirely happy with working on open source or on this one project, just leave it and pass it to the next one. And I often get asked, why did I create Tox? Or why did I call it Tox? And I was, oh, it was not me. It was somebody else, and it's just normal. And soon after that, Bernard noticed a pattern in the bug reports of Tox. And a lot of the bug reports actually were not for Tox, but for virtualenv. And Tox uses virtualenv in the background to create virtual environments. And at that time, Tox virtualenv wasn't really well maintained. So Bernard contributed a couple of bug fixes and so on, and then eventually became a maintainer of virtualenv. Yeah, you guessed it. What is the next thing? Bernard Garber started rewriting virtualenv, obviously. And before I tell you how that went, just to get this into perspective. At that time, I was a SOAP maintainer. This is a very old Python web framework. And at that time, we migrated from Python 2 to Python 3, and that for over 300 packages. And I was completely lost. I created so many virtual environments. I copied back and forth code. And remember, I was like 10 years in, or more than 10 years in the industry, and I didn't know how to do this. So I asked my fellow maintainers, and they, hey, we just use Tox. And that's the way when I came to know about Tox. So I'm super happy that everybody is here, that you exchange information, and that's the way to go forward and to learn about tools and don't wait 10 years. Then the resolution of the question, the virtualenv rewrite was successful. Bernard created a very entertaining and technical deep dive talk of it. You should watch it. And soon after that, only 1 week, he announced Tox 2nd edition rewrite on Twitter. And a little bit later, he created the first commit. And then something special. There was something special. He started streaming the rewrite on Tox, on Twitch. And I got to know that on Twitter. And imagine back then, I was the single Python dev in a small company, and everything I needed to learn, I learned from books or something else. And now there was this super experienced developer working on the tool alive and completely rewriting from scratch. Streaming live, he shared his thoughts about the design, the architecture, and I was really sucked into this Tox thing after that. I started answering Tox questions on Stack Overflow. That's my usual thing when I wanted to learn a new tool. I just answer other people's questions. And soon afterwards, I created a talk, because back then I was super confused. How should I run my linter? Do I run it with VS Code, or via command line, or via Tox, or via pre-commit? And it took a while, but then it clicked, and I created a talk to share my knowledge. I then started contributing to discussions and GitHub issues. And then Bernard announced Tox 4 Alpha 2. And he also asked the users to test it. So I tested it for my personal projects, for my 10 or so work projects. And then I remembered, I'm a contributor to SOAP, and we have 300 repositories, and all of them are using Tox. So I thought about, how can I test Tox against all those 300 repositories? And I didn't want to do this manually. So I used a tool called repos, And with this tool, you can clone a complete organization from GitHub, manipulate the repositories at scale, but you cannot run arbitrary tools against it. So I wrote a plugin and tested it against all 300 repositories. I did not say it was successful, so there were only 22% of the repositories actually worked with the new Tox version. So I reached out to Bernard and told him that, and he had a perfect answer on that. So a 22% success is not a great news, but on the plus side, it seems if you fix SOAP, we should be in a decent place, and that's the optimism we need here. Meanwhile, we also got some feedback on Twitter on the rewrite, especially as Bernard announced that the plugin system will be incompatible from Tox 3 to Tox 4. And Oliver, back then also a maintainer of Tox, asked, are the people with the torches and the pitchforks at the gates already? And spoiler, they were not yet. But we'll come back to that later. And then something nice happened. Jock joined the issue tracker, had a problem, and I helped solve it. She's unfortunately no longer here. And I think that's something important, a message I want to say here, that usually we only get bug reports or angry people, or they want to have features, or they want to have, that's 500 lines config file debugged for the company. So if you use open source software, reach out to them and they thank you. And then I created my first serious pull request for Tox about the issues I reported. And I was really into that. And I created pull request after pull request. And soon after that, Bernard announced me as a Tox maintainer. I did not want to rewrite it then. Again. And I don't know whether we can imagine that. I loved the tool, and it was so upward, so high. And now I became the maintainer of it, and this was so amazing for me. And only later I realized this is a lot of work for free. So I also created a talk about testing the pre-release against the SOAP at SOAP scale, which is also a pattern that we try to spread the word about the rewrite, because we anticipated there will be some issues. And Bernard announced also Tox 4 rewrite at PyCon US. And then, life happened. Imagine now, at the end of 2021, we are already 1.5 years into the rewrite. And then Bernard moved to the US, and you don't do this on the weekend, right? I built a house for my family, and I also joined Canonical, and I certainly wanted to, do a good job there. So basically, 1.5 years into the rewrite, we paused the rewrite almost for a year because we had no time. And you can imagine that the people got angry. And back to the torches and the pitchforks. But instead of torches, they used pipes. Okay. And we got some messages like this one. Just release it. That multi-year rewrite never seems to reach general availability. If this was been a business, it would be being bankrupt one long time ago. And at first I thought, oh my, such a... But then I thought, oh, what about if they're right? What about if we do something wrong? And then again, Bernard stepped up and gave a great answer. Such a major release will ultimately break a lot of people, and we need maintain availability to help those users and address their concerns. And so it's about the users and not about the maintainers. And then something remarkable happened I've never seen before in my career. We got a bug report on the Tox tracker that in the PyLib library, which is a dependency of Tox, there's a vulnerability. And the SVN module we didn't even use. So, well, okay, it is like that, but we can't do much about that. But then there are tools like pip audit and safety, which check the open source supply chain. And they report it as an error, and then for a lot of people, the CI broke. What did we do? Well, we had no chance to do a lot, so we recommended them to whitelist this vulnerability because, well, it's not affecting Tox. But this was only part one, because the same people, or maybe some other people, also reported the vulnerability against PyTest. because PyTest is also using that library. And then the PyTest people, which is super familiar and super widespread program, so they thought, hey, what can we do? And they did something different. They rendered PyLib for version 7. And render is when you basically take the source code of a library and you put it in your own source code. They left out SVN and a couple of other things they didn't need, and it worked out pretty well for PyTest. But they rendered PyLib in a very special way. Now the rendered PyLib shadows the installed PyLib. And Tox was trying to import from the PyLib, but from the rendered PyLib, and the rendered PyLib was only partial, so Tox broke, because there was a missing import. And this was a serious mess for us, because the combination of Tox and PyTest is super widespread. But we still did not have the capacity to do anything, right? And then something beautiful happened. Sorin Spanera announced to be able to work a full week on Tox 4. And he's a long-term friend of Tox and a plugin maintainer. And at the end, it was not a full week, but it really gave a new momentum. And so we finally moved it over the finish line. Only 3 years later, after we started, basically. And guess what happened? So we had lots of regressions. We had lots of complaints. But on the plus side, we also had lots of contributions. Almost 50 contributors new. And one of them became eventually also a Tox maintainer. And we got some praise, which is always nice. So let's think about why did we get so many regressions? And there is Hiram's law. And it says, with a sufficient number of users of an API, it doesn't matter what you promise in the contract, all observable behaviors of your system will be depended on by somebody. And virtually, we got bug reports for things we didn't even know that Tox is able to do. But now we know. And at that time, I was a little bit frustrated. Because whenever I contribute to Tox, I take away the time from my family and spending time with my kids. And anyway, the people got angry. And back then, I read a blog post, and it's called I'm Not Your Supplier. And that blog post really resonated with me. And because, you know, we offer that for free. It's about anybody to use it or to leave it. Certainly, we don't want to break you, but we have restrictions. And we do this in our spare time. So this was really a great blog post and some cheer up. And I don't want to bore you with the highlights of the release. But when you have a close look at that list, and when you compare it to what Bernard identified as the issues at the beginning, we pretty much reached that, what we wanted to do. So we are able to continue to develop and extend Tox and what is ever necessary for the future. And how was this possible? We used better abstractions. Before it was, you know, 1 or 2 or 3 files with a lot of mixed responsibilities. And now we had a config subpackage for configuration management, execute for command execution, and so on. And this was not entirely clear from the beginning, but it evolved over time. And after the rewrite, we sat together and we thought, hey, what did we do well? So we have an automated test suite, and this is given. You need to do this. You have to do this. We announced the rewrite on all channels, but don't think people really test all the versions. A couple of did. Thanks for that. After release, we sticked around to help the people migrating and unbreak their CI. We kept a legacy branch, so in case we needed to release an old, do a new release of the old version. We kept the old documentation, and yeah, we kept the Tox-free branch. So we also sat down together and thought about what could have we done better. And this sounds odd or maybe arrogant. So let me rephrase it. We could have done nothing better given the resources. That's just life. We are not full-time employees of Tox. And we also have a couple of lessons learned. You need to have a plan. You need to test a lot. You need to be available post-release. You need to prepare for bug fixes in the upcoming months after the release. Be ready to re-evaluate everything from the ground up. And be nice, but set boundaries. And obviously, we learned that legends are not always right. So, thank you very much for attending my talk. Thanks to the organizers for having me, and thanks for Canonical to send me here.
You were very fast. You have still 10 minutes left.
You told me to speed up.
No. So, but we already have 2 questions, so you can still ask questions, also online. I will read the first one. You mentioned PyProject TOML in the beginning of the talk. Why is there still only legacy support for PyProject TOML included in TOX 4?
Yeah, because of time restrictions. That's it. Previously with TOX 3 it was not possible, or almost not possible to edit. Now, as I showed you, we have the right abstractions in place, so anybody can contribute. We are currently, it was pretty stressful with the TOX 4 rewrite, and we are currently a little bit in maintenance mode and waiting for, settle everything, that everything settles down, and we are currently not available for new feature requests, or for working on new feature requests. We are super happy to onboard new people and to help people and to review merge proposals. But we need a little bit of rest after the rewrite. Okay.
One question which came very fast was the question, what's your opinion on Nox?
Nox, the developers of Nox are our friends. So basically, for those who don't know, there's TOX and there's Nox. And basically, both tools do similar things or the same things, like running tests or whatever things against multiple Python versions and managing virtual environments. And the main difference currently is that Nox uses a Python file for configuration. So you can do whatever you want. It's maybe a little bit more mightier, but it's also, you need to take care of what you put in. Because, compared to setup tools, they went away from having Python as a configuration language. But you certainly can use TOX. We are friends. I'm currently reviewing a book of one of the Nox authors, so we are really close friends, and we are not competitors. It's just getting better with two projects in the field. And they even have an importer. So I hope you don't want to move from TOX to Nox, but they have a TOX importer. Maybe I shouldn't have said that.
One of the most highest rated comments is "nice job," which is not a question, but...
Thank you.
The next one is, what is the main advantage of using TOX over CI solutions like GitHub Actions and matrix strategy?
Okay, so basically it's not an either-or. When you use TOX, you can use it everywhere, locally, on your machine, on your other machine, on your colleagues' machines, on whatever, and also on CI. So my strategy usually is, I create a local TOX file, I can run all the tests against all the different Python versions or combinations or whatever we want to test against, and then I also use TOX in GitHub Actions. So basically I install TOX in GitHub Actions and use the configuration file to run it. And so it's not an either-or, so it's a perfect solution to use both together. And that's what the one talk I mentioned earlier is about, how to combine linters, local development, and running things in CI. Because otherwise, you test something locally, then you need to completely build a matrix online, and basically TOX can create matrices already, so you don't need GitHub Actions for that. And imagine that you develop something, then you run maybe only the one Python version test locally, and you push it to CI, and it breaks after 10 minutes, 20 minutes, or whatever, and maybe all your colleagues get an email. So I want to make sure my code works before I push it.
Okay, I will just go like with the highest rated, okay? So the next one is, what did you learn joining as a maintainer, and would you really recommend it for someone with his family and a full-time job?
Okay. So I think in my career, which is pretty long, meanwhile, the first major thing was going to my first PyCon in 2017, where I met Miro. That was amazing for my career and for my development. And the second and most important thing was joining an open source project. Because back then I was a developer, the lone developer, a single developer in a small company, and I had not a lot of exchange with other developers. And working on open source projects was like working with world-class software engineers and getting reviews for free and giving something back. So it was one of the best decisions. But it was not like, oh, I want to contribute to that. It just evolved. I could not say like, oh, I like LibreOffice, let's contribute to it. I couldn't do that. It's like out of a necessity that you just, and that's about it. And how do I manage that with my family? I think it's super important that you talk with your employer, so that you get time during your work time to work on open source projects, especially when you use it at the company, but also you could just author for personal development. And I think that's the key. When TOX4 was released, in the internal canonical channels, there was a lot of, oh my God, my pipeline is broken, whatever, and I certainly tried to help them, but I also tried to help them with other Python toolings, and I think that's important. So don't only do that in your spare time. That's the key.
Yeah, I think that's a good advice. There are also some people asking how they could help contribute, how they can help.
Directly to TOX, I guess. So the easiest way or the best way is to have a look at the issue tracker, go through the, or maybe, well, that's the standard answer. Have a look at the issue tracker, have a look at some easy task. But the first thing would be, try to use TOX. And if you feel the documentation is really good enough. And that's what I do when I use other projects. I just set up a test or try the tutorials, and like in 90%, not in the PyData popular thing, but in that area where I contribute, 90% of the documentation is outdated and does not work, and the examples does not work. And this is my first contribution to a new project. And then I already see whether the maintainers react, but sometimes they're unmaintained. And I think that's the first thing. And if you feel comfortable, have a look at the issue tracker, or just talk to us. We are on Discord, discord.gg/tox. You can always reach out to us. And I think after the rewrite TOX, it's still not the easiest project to contribute, but we have really good abstraction, so it's way easier than before.
Some people are interested in the question whether the fix would have been possible without complete rewrite.
The fix to the first problems we have, like the 5 problems Bernard identified at the beginning, that would be super, super hard or almost impossible. There were open bug reports for 5 years or something like that, and it was just too massive to act on that. It was always like, you know, building on top a little bit, but the foundation was not correct. And when this refers to the one thing about the PyLib, maybe it would have been possible, but we are already very close to the finish line, and I'm super happy that we did it like that.
Okay. Another question is, did TOX try getting sponsorship or going into an umbrella organization to get help with maintenance?
Okay. Actually, we did not yet. And full disclaimer, currently, I think I get 43 euros a month from some sponsorship, or basically some companies can pay open source maintainers or products they use. And we have not put a lot of effort in that yet. And maybe that's a way, but funding is not, we all have good developer jobs, so it's not the #1 priority. It's certainly nice to have some compensation. When I tell my wife sometimes I will sit down on Friday afternoon or Friday night to work on TOX. But from a maintainership perspective, I think we are healthy. We are now 3 maintainers. That's certainly not comparable to the big PyData projects or something like that. But we are open to new contributors and new maintainers. So if you want to try it out, and just go for it.
Okay. So maybe one last question. Any ideas for TOX 5?
It's the same question like Python 3. And what about Python 4? And I hope it will never arrive, because it broke so many things.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.